For 130,000 years ago, in a cave in Spain, archaeologists found a skull with two identical holes punched into the forehead, made by the same weapon, struck twice, from the same angle. Not an accident, not an animal. Someone did this on purpose, and whoever it was got away with it for nearly 500,000 years. The cave is called Sima de los Huesos, the pit of bones, buried deep inside the Atapuerca Mountains. To reach it, you have to crawl through narrow passages and drop down a 13-meter vertical shaft into total darkness. At the bottom, researchers found the bones of at least 28 individuals, an early human species called Homo heidelbergensis, ancestors to both Neanderthals and possibly us. And one of those skulls had been struck, deliberately twice, with enough force to kill. The wounds were nearly identical in size and shape. The angle barely changed between the two strikes. Researchers studying it concluded this wasn't the result of an accident, a fall, or a predator attack. Someone stood over another person and hit them, hard on purpose, more than once. This is, as far as we know, the oldest violent death in the human story. But here's the question nobody can actually answer. Was it a crime? Because to call something a crime, you need something else to exist first. You need a rule. For most of our evolutionary history, that rule didn't exist, at least not in any form we'd recognize. Early hominin groups were small, mobile, and held together by something closer to instinct than law, shared resources, shared danger, shared survival. There was no concept of property to steal, no marriage to betray, no court to stand trial in. Anthropologists studying surviving hunter-gatherer societies, the closest living window we have into that ancient way of life, have found that even today, some of these groups have no formal punishment system at all. Conflict gets resolved through gossip, shame, or simply walking away. So if the man in that cave really was murdered, it likely wasn't a crime in any legal sense. It was something rawer, a grievance settled the only way available, with violence, and no consequence beyond whatever fear or guilt lived inside the person who did it. So when did that start to change? When did humans decide that hurting someone wasn't just personal, it was wrong? The answer seems to trace back to something surprisingly unglamorous: rules about food. Long before anyone wrote a law, anthropologists believe humans developed taboos, unwritten rules so deeply held that breaking them felt almost physically wrong. And one of the oldest, most universal taboos across nearly every hunter-gatherer culture ever studied involves food sharing. In groups built around cooperative hunting, the person who killed an animal didn't get to keep it. The meat was distributed according to strict, almost ritualized rules, often dictated by kinship, not by who actually did the killing. Hoarding meat, eating in secret, or refusing to share wasn't just rude. In some recorded cultures, it was treated as one of the most serious offenses a person could commit, sometimes punished more harshly than violence itself. Why? Because in a small group where everyone's survival depended on everyone else, selfishness was a threat to the whole tribe. A murderer was a tragedy. A hoarder could starve the entire group to death slowly, from the inside. So if Sima de los Huesos shows us the oldest violence, food-sharing taboos may show us something closer to the oldest crime, the first time humans agreed, collectively, that a specific behavior deserved punishment, not because it hurt one person but because it threatened everyone. From there, the rules multiplied. As groups grew larger, taboos around incest appeared almost universally across unrelated cultures worldwide. A sign this wasn't cultural copying, it was something close to a shared evolutionary solution to a shared biological problem. Taboos against certain killings, specifically killing within the group, started to separate from killings outside it, which were often tolerated or even expected. The very first distinction between murder and warfare may be one of the oldest moral lines our species ever drew. And slowly, almost invisibly, these unwritten taboos started hardening into something else, actual consequences, decided not by instinct, but by groups of people sitting down and agreeing on what should happen next. By the time we reach written history, the transformation is complete. The Code of Ur-Nammu, created in ancient Mesopotamia around 2100 BCE, is the oldest written legal code ever discovered, predating the more famous Code of Hammurabi by roughly 3 centuries. It lists specific crimes and specific punishments. If a man commits a murder, he shall be killed. If a man commits a robbery, he shall be killed. Precise, codified, no more gossip, no more walking away. A crime now had a defined consequence, decided in advance, applied the same way to everyone. For the first time in our species' long history, justice wasn't personal anymore. It was a system, and that brings us back to the man in the pit. Whoever swung that weapon 430,000 years ago will never be named, never tried, never punished. There was no system yet to hold him accountable, no word for what he'd done. But the people around him, the ones who carried his body and lowered it 13 meters into the dark, still felt something about it. Maybe grief, grief, maybe fear, maybe an instinct that this wasn't supposed to happen. That feeling, the one with no name and no law behind it, is where every crime that came after actually started. Not with a written rule, but with a group of people looking at something terrible and agreeing, without saying it out loud, that it should never happen again. We like to think of laws as something written down by serious men in togas or robes, carved into stone tablets. But the truth is, the first law wasn't written by anyone. It was felt by a small group of people standing at the edge of a dark pit, holding a body and understanding, maybe for the first time, that some things just shouldn't be done to one another.